I wrote the master thesis on the topic of crypto for the people 1 year ago in the spring of 2023, where I focused on protecting marginalized groups from mass surveillance. And my supervisor is Katrine Demore, who's joined us on Zoom, I think. And I wrote the thesis on the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. It's a very small town. As I said, I was very inspired by Crypto for the People talk by Senni Kamara in 2020, and I wanted to, for my master thesis, I wanted to put information security in a broader context. So I started to investigate it, and I wanted to investigate how people-centered approach to cryptography realized. I started off by investigating the research field on surveillance and marginalized groups, tried to understand what the research field was actually doing up until now. And I found a lot of research from different disciplines, not only in the information security community, but also other communities. And what I noticed was that there were different approaches to kind of meet the topic in a way. So that triggered an interest of trying to find out how we could realize a people-centered approach to cryptography. And I identified 3 research questions. The first one was what marginalized groups might need protection against mass surveillance. I wanted to do kind of a meta-analysis on what the research community had been mapping out up until now, and where the research had been located. And then I wanted to also see or ask experts in the field of people-centered research and also cryptography on how they kind of felt like such an approach could be realized. I then also wanted to, I'm just putting it here, but I also investigated if cryptographers could play a role in protecting marginalized groups from mass surveillance. But for the sake of this presentation, I will not go into that because I don't have time for it. I know that it's in the program and I'm sorry about it, but 15 minutes is less than I anticipated in the beginning. Okay, I just first have to give some disclaimers here. I am not a cryptographer. I am just a master's student in information security that has kind of had an interest in this and tried to learn as much as I could on my own terms. And I also have seeked out information from people that are experts. But if something seems kind of off, it could possibly be off. And if that's the case, then please correct me and we can have a discussion about it. I'm also Norwegian. This is my second language, and it's about 11 p.m. right now in Norway. Came yesterday, so if I stumble on some words, that's probably it. So now you know. And I also wrote this thesis for a year ago. So some of the data and the results that I'm going to share is probably a bit outdated because there's hopefully been more happening in the field this year that has been, or more research has been done in the last year. And I also have the memory of a goldfish. So if there's very detailed questions about the research methodology that I used or detailed questions about the results, I might not be able to remember everything right here at the spot, but I can go back. I'm pretty confident that the things that I'm presenting here is justified in my thesis, and I can return to the thesis and hopefully provide you a more accurate answer. For this talk, I will keep it on a very high level. I will just present some key takeaways that I find very interesting, and I hopefully this can be of inspiration or something that you can discuss in coffee breaks tomorrow. And yeah, I will also be here until lunch tomorrow, so we can come up to me and ask some more questions. But to start off, I wanted to do a systematic literature review on research question number 1 and research question number 2. The first one that I wanted to investigate is what has the literature been done, or what marginalized groups have been studied. Has there been any trends in terms of events that has happened in historical events, and where has the research been located? And then I also wanted to assess the research field and trying to see what kind of research methods had been done on this topic up until now, and if there were any cryptographers involved in some of these topics. So I started to do a multi-tier backward reference search, meaning that I had a few papers that was talking about information and security and marginalized group as a whole. And then I checked their references, and if they were kind of talking about similar topics, then I would put them in a list and then scan through those references again. And I ended up scanning about 419 different references on the topic of information security and marginalized groups. I then developed or reduced those sources into what was actually relevant for the topic of surveillance and marginalized groups, and it developed a code book to categorize 135 different articles that was talking about this topic. And I ended up with 60 research articles that dealt with the topic of marginalized groups affected by government surveillance, and then 86 articles addressing marginalized groups and surveillance. And those are kind of the data sets that my findings will be kind of coming from in the next couple of slides. And so I think I'm ready to present the findings on the research question number 1. I found that 38.3% of the different articles were studying people experiencing low socioeconomic status. So if they were studying people experiencing homelessness, then they would fit into this category. And then I also found that 36.7% of the studied marginalized groups were activists, journalists, and whistleblowers. And you can probably argue that these don't necessarily fit the category of marginalized groups, but I think they were still experiencing some discrimination at this point. So I added them into the scope of this thesis, because I think it creates some sort of value. But a very interesting thing is that we can see almost exclusively from 2003 up until 2011 that people experiencing low socioeconomic status is the ones that are being studied. And then almost to the date of the Snowden leakages in 2012, activists with whistleblowers and journalists are also kind of steadily being studied. I also found that the research that was conducted was mostly located in North America, Europe, and Asia, which is kind of interesting. And you could probably reflect on that and discuss it in the breaks. But no research was actually found to be located in South America. That doesn't necessarily mean that there weren't, for instance, refugees from some countries that were coming from, for instance, Africa or South America, but they were then studied in America, for instance, and then they would fit into the North America category. Yeah. And then I also wanted to see what type of research approaches was done. And I found that 66.3% of all of the articles actually used a people-centered approach to answer this question. A people-centered approach was, I defined it as if they involved the group in some way, if it was a survey or if it was in-depth interviews or ethnographic studies, then that was kind of categorized as people-centered research. But if they were more talking about it in theoretical terms, it would be more 30s. It would fit the non-people-centered part. But I found it very interesting that so many of them were people-centered. And then I started to look at, okay, how many cryptographers have been involved in this type of study, and I found 10.5% was part of this research. And so that kind of made me wonder, okay, is it even applicable in the field of cryptography? And I'm not a cryptographer, so I don't necessarily know. You could probably answer this more than I could at the time, but I wanted to see what experts on the fields were thinking about how to realize it in the field of cryptography. So I started to perform in-depth semi-structured expert interviews with people or to answer these two questions. I will not go into the research question number 3, so I will just move on. I talked to 12 different participants, and they were experts in the field of people-centered approaches or cryptography or information security in both industry and in academia. And for the challenges that the participants were talking about was mainly to do that cryptographers doesn't necessarily have the competence to do people-centered approach work. Some might have felt like they had the competence to do it because they had courses to do so, or studied other programs, but most of the people or most of the cryptographers didn't feel like they had the competence to do that work and wasn't necessarily supposed to do it. In addition, they said that people-centered issues are very complicated and very unpredictable, which may not be mathematically solvable, which can maybe be a real challenge if you want to introduce it into the field of cryptography. And then for entry barriers, one of the things that the participants were talking about was, and this has been mentioned earlier today as well, is the issue of whether or not it will lead to revolutionary cryptography. And if that's not the case, then one have to overcome cryptographers' interests on the topic. Another entry barrier was to make it valued in the research community that this type of work is also very important and not necessarily only what is some people are saying is theoretical cryptography. One participant also talked about the issue of having to publish at a high rate in the crypto community, whereas people-centered research can take many years to do it properly, and that can kind of cause people not achieving tenure or if they haven't published these amounts of articles within these types of years. And then also funding was a big issue where working on these type of topics may not be profitable for the people funding them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they shouldn't be funded. One opportunity that came and was repeatedly said was the topic about having multidisciplinary collaboration. But an important success factor here would be to maintain strong disciplines, that people still maintain strong. Oh, now I'm really feeling the 11 p.m. But that is people maintain their strong discipline or are strong in their own disciplines, because if they're not, then one discipline may kind of dominate the other discipline, and that can kind of give some off-putting results. They also said that they need incentives to motivate this type of work. You need venues and forums and places for people to meet, and also venues that kind of gives incentives or encourage people to come to these events. Yeah. I think I'm going to conclude by just taking a step back and looking at the topic of this workshop. I find it very interesting, and I'm so happy that I was able to come here and was invited to come here. I wanted this kind of presentation to just start off having a discussion and presenting some of the findings. I really want to publish the results. I've said that for a long time now, but me and Katrin have a plan on resuming the work in August when she's having a forskningstermin in Norwegian, but she's going to focus on research for a year. So hopefully then we can get it published and you can read more about it in detail. Yeah, thank you.